All right, so our next panel this afternoon is Building for the Future. Our moderator is going to be Eric Annis. He's an associate professor of biology here at Hood College and director of the master's program in environmental biology. He teaches graduate and undergraduate courses on climate change, and his research focuses on temperature tolerance of marine organisms. So thank you to Eric.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around on a beautiful day. I'm jealous for everybody that just went outside on the break. We have our last panel of the day is looking at the future of building and how we address climate change through adaptation and our structures. Our first speaker is actually one of our professors here at Hood College, Dr. Drew Ferrier. He is an aquatic ecologist. He's been a professor here for 25 years. Let that sink in. He is the director of our coastal and our Center for Coastal and Watershed Studies, and he has also just gotten a sustainability major off the ground within our biology department. And so he's going to be giving the first presentation on local climate change effects and impacts, setting the stage to build the future.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about, actually setting the stage for building the future by looking again at our impacts. And we've talked over the course of the day about many of the impacts that are coming, and so I'm going to just move through some of these that we've already talked about rather quickly, and maybe talk about other ones that we haven't considered so much. And one of the things that I do want to say at the outset here is when we say building for the future, we can define that in many ways. It can be building physical infrastructure, and I think we'll be talking about that in this panel somewhat. But it's also building financial infrastructure, building public health infrastructure, building social infrastructure, and so forth. So building for the future really has a really large connotation to it. So very quickly, we know that our climate is changing, and for Maryland, what's happening to it? It's getting, as you can see over here, it's getting a little bit wetter, and it's getting a little bit warmer. Those are the two take-homes here, but not quite in the same way as it has in the past. Here's the three key messages in terms of climate change for Maryland. Temperatures have risen, and they're going to rise to historically unprecedented levels in the coming decades. And then precipitation is projected to increase too, as I just showed you, particularly though in the winter and the spring, and particularly in a series of very large precipitation events and periods of drought. So it's not a nice steady rain that's happening throughout the year. It's going to be very much an event-based sort of thing that increases the risk of flooding. And the last message, I'll put it up here because it does affect Maryland, it doesn't affect us, is sea level rise. So unless you have a summer home down on the bay, we'll just let this one sit for right now and talk about the other two that I just mentioned that are going to affect Frederick. So I want to just mention briefly heavy rains, higher water temperatures, which we haven't addressed yet, and heat waves and droughts. Those are the three major areas. Rainfalls are getting more intense, as you can see here, and there's a number of ways of expressing this, but over the course of the last 50 or so years, you can see that we have a general uptick in the intensity of rainfalls, and this is, of course, due to there's more water vapor in the atmosphere, and it leads to these increasingly larger rainfalls and increasingly higher winds that are associated with these rainfall events, which are leading to soil erosion in one case and other effects as well. Derechos were mentioned in an earlier talk, and I just wanted to show you, again, one of those derecho events. Here's one that occurred in 2012, and here's a succession of radar images, and you can follow that storm right across Maryland. It's kind of hard to see Maryland, it's right in here, but over a little more than a 24-hour period, it swept through our area, and the thing to notice here is not only were there lots of thunderstorms, but every asterisk, and I know those asterisks are kind of hard to see here, little black asterisks, and there's many, many of them, indicate peak winds of over 80 miles an hour. So these are really strong storms, and it left millions without power. But what did it do around here? And these are all local images from that particular derecho. The high points are crop damage, property damage, forest damage, and power outages. These are the major leftovers from those kinds of storms, and we're likely to see more of them. Also flooding, and this was mentioned earlier today too, but I'll provide a few of the photos to go along with that. Not only from that derecho, but here we are from 2014, 2018, 2019. All of these, and I'm sure that you recognize some of these areas that were damaged. So these storms are one aspect, but water temperatures are one that we don't talk too much about. And here you can see a Chesapeake Bay wide look at water temperatures in the region, and you see that all the red pyramids that are pointing upward, those are significantly increasing water temperatures where they've been measured here over a considerable period of time. A very few of them are showing any decreases in water temperature. So we're having lots of our streams and rivers change character in terms of water temperature, something we didn't really consider too much in decades previous. We did a little study around here from Hood for the city of Frederick, and this is an ongoing thing. We've done this for the last few years, looking at stream temperatures around Frederick, just to give you an idea. One of the things, one of our sort of canaries in the coal mine for our region are brook trout. They're the only native trout species in Frederick County, in Maryland for that matter. And they have a very narrow temperature tolerance and a fairly cool temperature tolerance. Gets above 60 degrees water temperature and they're in trouble. Gets above 77 and they're probably going to be expatriated from that area. So the city was wondering, in the outer bands of the city, what are we dealing with? Well, in terms of water temperature. And so they picked out some streams that they were concerned with, and we've been studying them for the last few years. What we do is we go out and we put water temperature monitors into the streams. The monitor is actually in this little piece of PVC. And we log the temperature every few minutes and keep a record of it for the summer months from June to through August. And we've done this. We've put out, for instance, 47 loggers in 6 different streams. We measured the temperature at 20-minute intervals. We also put an air logger every so often so that we can see how that compares to air temperature. And so just to show you very quickly here, here's one stream that you might be familiar with on the northern edge of the city, Tuscarora Creek. Here's Willowbrook, here's North Crossing as a couple of the developments out that way. Cannon Bluff is right here. And we put some loggers at each of these yellow points. And we were looking to see if this stream was still reaching or maintaining its use class. It's a class 3P stream. That's a state designation. and that would mean that it is capable of holding trout. Is it still meeting that use class? Well, what are the criteria? The maximum temperature has to be less than 23 degrees. The 90th percentile temperature has to be less than 20 degrees. And the time that it is above 20 degrees should be no more than 10% of the time. Well, here's some data from several of these sites that I show along here. And everything that you see in yellow, here is maximum temperature, here is 90th percentile, here's percent of time greater than 20 degrees. All of those exceed all of the classes for that stream. That stream is not meeting its criteria in terms of temperature in any way, shape, or form, and it no longer holds trout if in fact it was a trout stream at one point. And other streams are undergoing these same sorts of issues. The other place that we want to take a look at is air temperatures and consider droughts and heat waves. Here's some data. This is actually for Baltimore. The number of days above 105 in 2000, the projected for 2030, the projected for 2050, and these over here, these numbers indicate this heat island effect that was talked about earlier, and the fact that it is warmer in urban areas versus rural areas. And they're saying, well, for these data, 2.7 degrees warmer on average than outlying areas, and particularly warmer at night. Urban areas hold their heat much more at night, and suburban areas and rural areas cool off more. Well, that's great for Baltimore, but what is Frederick doing? We were also asked by the city a couple of years ago to do an initial heat island study for Frederick City. And so what we did is we put out these same temperature loggers. You might have seen them on light poles all through the city. Every one of these blue dots is where we put them. And we were looking at temperatures every about 20 minutes or so, and comparing them to an outlying area, a close by outlying area that was similar in elevation and so forth. We did this for the month of August one year, and it produced a huge amount of data. You can imagine if you took somebody's temperature every 20 minutes for a month, how many data points you'd have, and then if you had 47 people you were doing that with, how many more data points you'd have. So it was a huge amount of data. But to show you just an example of this heat island effect, this red line is a 24-hour period in August for a location down near the library. And here is that same 24 hours for our rural location. And you can see here that we have over a 10-degree difference, particularly at night. And so we are seeing those heat island effects here in Frederick. And they're not equal everywhere. The redder the little dot, the higher the temperature is relative to our reference site. So you can see that downtown is quite a bit hotter. Out the Golden Mile and the apartments and so forth behind the Golden Mile are quite a bit hotter as well. So this has ramifications in terms of environmental justice issues and so forth. Now, why would we be worried about all this? Well, the Maryland State Public Health Department tells us that with these climate changes come other changes, other knock-on effects. One is that they're expecting an increase because of extreme precipitation events they are expecting an increase of 23% in the risk of motor vehicle accidents. In terms of extreme heat events, they're looking at an increase in respiratory and circulatory issues, heart attacks, for instance, increasing in the summer months, as well as asthma. And I'll just finish up by saying there's also public health effects in terms of bacterial growth on crops, and on the prevalence, and this was mentioned, of ticks and tick-borne diseases. And we did just a preliminary study at Hood looking at some ticks here. We found, someone mentioned Lyme disease a little while ago, we found that about half the ticks that we were able to collect contained the bacteria that produces Lyme disease. So it's pretty prevalent in our area. We also have chances of picking up new tick species that are further south. Because of our milder winters, these ticks also overwinter, and the populations are higher in the years presently than they were in past decades. Same thing goes with mosquitoes and mosquito-borne illnesses too. So there's public health infrastructures that we have to be concerned with as well. One thing we can do here is mitigate climate change by reducing emissions, and we have to do that, but then we also have to look at climate adaptation, and that's what our panel's going to be talking about. Yep. There you go.
Our next speaker is Tracy Coleman, who is a civil engineer and is the Deputy Director of the Department of Public Works, Engineering and Operations. And she's going to tell us a little bit about Frederick's plans for building flood resiliency. It's late in the afternoon. At any rate, Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for all those who are still here. I know it is a beautiful day. I will be brief. I'm talking about some things that the City of Frederick has done and will be doing in the area of flood resiliency. Dr. Ferrier mentioned that we are seeing storms now that are much more intense. And what does that mean? As an engineer, we used to design stormwater systems for kind of a bell curve type of a storm. So it would be over, a certain amount of rainfall spread out evenly over a 24-hour period. The more intense storms that we see have the higher volume of rain in a very, very short period of time. But what I want to talk about just quickly at the beginning is the City of Frederick has been a leader when it comes to flood resiliency. Those of you who are familiar with the Carroll Creek project know that many, many years ago we had issues with floods from some large catastrophic storms. In June of '72, Tropical Storm Agnes came through the city, devastated the downtown area. The top picture shows that, and thankfully it's a big enough screen that you can see. Patrick Street is the street thoroughfare you see on the left, and then All Saints Street is on the right, and everything else in between that is underwater. In October of '76, we had a localized storm that caused a flood in Carroll Creek and the streets of Frederick as well. So what did Frederick do? That devastating flood caused the city to come up with some potential solutions to saving the downtown and creating resiliency within the more historic district of the city. Sorry, I'm a little bit stuffy today. So what we came up with was the Carroll Creek Flood Control System. If you didn't realize this, I'm surprised at how many people don't. If you walk along the Carroll Creek Linear Park from Bent Street all the way to Highland, you are walking on a conduit system. And there are 4 large conduits that can convey basically the 100-year storm, which is a bit of a misnomer, but it can convey about 13,000 cubic feet per second of water through the downtown area. This project, the design itself, the concept was sold on the idea of downtown development and creating a vibrant linear park in the downtown area. It was a $60 million project, and that's for the conduit system itself and some pump stations that are a part of it. Those costs were shared by the city, the county, and the state. It's about a 1.3 miles of these basically 20 foot by 20 foot conduit that runs all the way from Baker Park, where the inlet is, to Highland Street, where it outflows into the natural portion of Carroll Creek. Normal flows of Carroll Creek are carried in that center channel that you see in the middle. What did it do? It removed a significant amount of the downtown Frederick area from what was the FEMA 100-year floodplain. It took away, it took 134 acres and more than 400 buildings out of that floodplain that are all within the 17 square mile watershed of the Carroll Creek. Floodwaters are attenuated in Baker Park, so I heard some discussion about Baker Park earlier and making it more natural. Just so you know, it is supposed to flood. We can make it natural. Well, we need to make it such that it can still hold those floodwaters, because it is a basin that allows for that slowing of water before it gets into the creek. What I want to move on to now is we had the long-term vision. I'm going to skip over this. I think a lot of you are very familiar with Carroll Creek and where it's come in the many, many years that it's been in existence. So what is the city looking at now? We heard some people talk a little bit earlier about some various high-intensity storms. Now here are just a few of those that we dealt with localized flooding over the past years. Some photos of those from 2015 and from 2018. They had some devastating effects both in the city and in the county. So what the city did is we partnered with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We took a look at initially 4 different locations where we had some significant catastrophic flooding. The Corps of Engineers analyzed those areas and came up with some conceptual designs. The city added those areas as capital improvement projects to our capital improvement program, and we are taking the concepts that the Army Corps of Engineers developed, and we are designing some kind of additional system, maybe not to the size and magnitude of Carroll Creek, but something that will help prevent future flooding in those areas. We have added 3 additional areas to that for the Army Corps to study. Just to give you a little bit of an update, Task 1, the Moderator Avenue, I've listed the CIP numbers there as well. The Moderator Avenue system, the design is complete. We are getting ready to put it out for bid. And so that first task order will be underway probably by the end of this summer. In addition to the Moderator Avenue improvements, we will be at the end of that. It outfalls at East Street in the park near the skate park. We got some federal grant money to start a stream restoration project along that area as well. We have some of the other projects. We have the conceptual designs, and we are partnering with either developers in some areas, or we are seeking other grants to go beyond the designs and implement some of the concepts that the Corps helped us on. I love this. I know a lot of people felt that there was news that Baker Park flooded in 2018, and that wasn't a good thing. But through engineering, we came up with something that saved the downtown. We flooded an area that it was okay to flood, that was resilient enough to bounce back after that flood. And we're going to do the same thing with these areas that we're looking at in the other localized areas that flooded. So I thank you.
Wow, that's really cool. I honestly had no idea there were corridors underneath that whole structure downtown. So that was very interesting. Our next and final speaker is Joel Rensberger, and he is a home builder. He is also on the Planning Commission for Frederick. And fun fact, I guess you are a descendant of the original settlers of Frederick? Well, there you go. I give you Joel Rensberger.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for staying. I'm going to talk about the built environment, specifically dwellings, shelter for the humans in the environment. Now, as he was kind enough to mention, there was a European invasion of North America that took place. Started about 500 years ago. It hasn't stopped. Look around. We're all still here. We're breeding. We're moving around. And we require shelter. Now, that European invasion, of course, was quickly joined by Africans, willing and unwilling, and Asians and Arabs, and all sorts of types. All of these invaders need shelter. Whether your family was an early arrival, like mine, or a later arrival from a later century, we're all still here, and as the population grows, we want to have an eye towards this new construction, this new shelter that we'll have to practice. So what do? We consider density versus sprawl. How does that relate to the urban heat island when you talk about density? We have to consider affordability when considering getting the unhoused housed or getting people properly housed. And of course, we're here today because we have to consider climate change and how we approach our buildings, both new and existing stock. Now, new housing stock, I just finished a home last month. It's a cocoon. It's got several features built into it. It's one of the most energy efficient homes, if not the most energy efficient home, except for maybe one that Bruce Zavos may have done, this year in Frederick County. I've been doing electric vehicle charging standard in my homes for 13 years. But now it's law in Frederick. At least the conduit runs from the vehicle parking back to the electric panel of the house. So that's progress. Beginning in May of this year, well, let me back up. You know these solar panel layouts that look like a paused game of Tetris, where they sort of stop, start, and at some of these interruptions, there's a lonely plumbing pipe coming up through that area. Well, beginning in May, in Frederick County, builders like me finally have permission in the plumbing code to spread those vents out and allow for clean, uninterrupted, less Tetris-y solar panel installations. So there's another incremental change. For me, what's next? Do I refuse to do gas and propane work? Maybe. Will that cost me a customer? I don't know. Frederick's code is evolving. The new IRC, International Residential Code, will be adopted by Frederick County most likely in the first quarter of 24. Those are energy efficient upgrades. Everyone in this room probably supports it. I support it. It will increase the cost of housing, so that's a drawback. Some of the things that I'm looking for is more closed cell foam, sealing attics, bringing HVAC equipment inside the thermal envelope, even the ductwork, no more furnaces in the attic. Those things are actually relatively affordable. So I'm going to be pressing my colleagues to do more of that, more of those, because those are easy, and we can brag about it to our customers. But I think the greater challenge, and I mentioned that long arc of history of the European invasion in Frederick, I believe, based on population trends, that most homes that will ever be built that have ever been built, will ever be built in Frederick, have already been built. We're one of the original 13 colonies. We have a housing stock that's 100, 200, 300 years old. And while we can choke down on new building code, as we probably should, on guys like me building houses today, because we can do better, we must pay serious attention to the farmhouse built in 1850 with an oil-fired furnace with a buried oil tank in the yard that may or may not leak. No one's seen it in 65 years. And the windows are single pane, leak like a sieve. That house needs greater investment dollars, because it would take 50 of my homes to equal the carbon footprint of that existing house. Now, that doesn't mean we knock it down and build a new home, because the carbon impact on building a new house, that's dramatic. There's no way around that. The existing home has the lowest environmental impact when compared to new construction. So we save it. But we have to get dollars into the hands of people to be able to do those upgrades. Some of these homes are occupied by single elderly or middle or low income, or people who just don't know what is available to them out there. So I'm excited for the Fitzwater administration and others that she's brought onto her team, so that my hope, and if you guys can go forward and help lobby for this, realizing the daily carbon footprint of the existing housing stock is so toxic. Let's lobby and advocate for creating simple, mobile-friendly online applications processes for grants and loan programs. Some of these programs already exist in Frederick County. They don't advertise it very well. They should. More are coming. We should open this retrofit program to landlords, because 20% of Frederick County's population is a rental environment. So you knock on the door, the person that answers isn't the decision maker anyway. We should open these programs up to landlords, with the caveat that once these energy retrofits are completed and the landlord's energy costs go down, those rental rates will follow with it. That's one way to address the affordability problem. We should expand the current definition of repair, which is covered by some of these emergency programs that Frederick County offers, to include energy efficient upgrades and deferred maintenance. We don't have to wait until the building is falling apart and it's an emergency to get that grant money. It would have been a lot cheaper to do it sooner, and you would have started to enjoy that benefit even sooner. So, in closing, Frederick County is making incremental steps on new construction, and that's great, and I'm going to help it. And the Frederick County Building Industry Association, of which I'm a member, is going to help move that forward. But let's not forget that the 272,000 people that live here already, that's probably 175,000 existing homes. We talk about building maybe 5,000 more units next year. What about that 175,000 that are already here? The ones most specifically built before 1990. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to our speakers again. Another round of applause for all three of you. I think it was one of these buttons, wasn't it? To shut the projection down.
If you know how to do it. And if we can get
I don't know if we'll get it back, but I shut it down.
Oh, great.
Okay, we have probably 5 or 10 minutes for questions, so have at it.
Hi. The first question I have is for Tracy. When it comes to the flooding in Frederick, especially the areas now that flood North Market Street, et cetera, on your map, has the city given any consideration to promote water sequestration at houses and commercial buildings to limit the water that's getting into the street?
We have not. That's an interesting idea. We do encourage, through our sustainability department, we encourage reduction or removal of impervious area, but it is not mandated in the city, and if there is already drainage going onto, in a public right-of-way, the city is basically required to provide that safe conveyance, and that's what we're working on.
Yeah, and obviously the easiest one is to do rain barrels. It could be more elaborate than that, but if we started to promote it and maybe give incentives to building owners, either residents or commercial building owners, to be able to, even the more elaborate ones is you can take that and then you can use that for flushing your toilets.
Right.
So you're using that rainwater for another use.
Right, yeah. Again, we don't have, at the moment, we don't have any incentives for that or any programs that require it. If any of you saw our stormwater management team's booth at In the Streets this year, they gave away a rain barrel. So we do have a team at the city that is working towards things like that on a voluntary basis.
Actually, one of our committee members here
Oh.
won that rain barrel. He's
Excellent.
not here today. And Joel, my second question is for you. You concentrated on the county, but you also were talking about the existing housing stock. And as a resident of downtown city of Frederick, my house is on the National Historic Registry. What kind of things can we do? Because we love to preserve the historic structure that my house up in New York was built in 1865. My house down here is built in 1865. I'm drawn to historic structures. But up in New York, I didn't have the historic regulations that I think are limiting to us to be able to actually preserve them better and to make them more energy efficient. Have you had any discussions with people in terms of the city and it not relaxing the historic codes, but bringing them up to speed where, I don't think National Historic homes should have chipped painted windows that are drafty?
It's an excellent question, and I have experience with it professionally and personally. And this happens when the historic preservation folks, of which I count myself as one, sometimes some have a myopic approach and think that a window should be wood and should be painted. So folks resist enrolling in these sorts of districts or fight it or resign themselves to a lifetime of 24-foot step ladders and painting, and or they never get the windows changed, or they try and do it on a Sunday and not get caught. There's a reconciliation that needs to happen with that, because preserving those historic structures, like I said, is if you save one, then you don't need to build a new one. And the carbon footprint of building the new one, forget the monthly operating cost, which is most of what I talked about, but the initial impact is huge. Dumpsters, concrete plants, all that. I think a meeting of the minds, perhaps leadership, especially because the city is full of these buildings, maybe a meeting between the historic preservation folks and elected leadership to just say, look, give us an inch. Let's walk a couple of these things back. Great. But there are many things that you can do. Injecting insulation into uninsulated walls, bringing the furnaces out of the attic and making a small closet inside. There's lots that can be done. But you're right, those folks need to meet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At the state level, I think government is saying that government should lead and set the example, and probably that's happening at the county level too. But school systems are a huge part of public buildings. And are there any plans for the school systems? Do you know?
I will try to answer that. Frederick County is engaging with the Board of Education to have all new Frederick County buildings. So government buildings, like Ice Dome or a police station, or I think a school is included in that, to be built with a high degree of sustainability in mind, and I believe County Executive Fitzwater's behind it, and I hope they intend to brag about it, because the chatter that I'm hearing is that it's going to be pretty great.
Yes, absolutely.
I'll be shorter. Two questions, actually, for Joel, and this may relate to Shannon. I'm aware of the PACE program at the county level for small businesses to do energy efficiency upgrades. Last I knew, it was not being hugely utilized. I wonder if there's a chance for expansion of that kind of program to the older housing stock. Do you want me to ask my second question first?
Can I try and answer the first one first?
Yes.
Okay. You're exactly right. And if I didn't mention it up there, the current grant or loan limits of some of these existing programs are paltry dollar amounts that don't do enough. You can't replace a house of windows with a $6,000 budget. I need $20,000, you know? So yes, they need to expand these programs, the lending and grant limits, but also advertise them. Until I started looking into this, I didn't know some of these programs existed. And I can't be the only one. I get around. I'd never heard of them.
Thank you. My second question is, I am building a house right now, a net zero house in Frederick County. I have some ambivalence about it because as much as I'm happy about it, I'm taking a little piece of woods away from where my house is. What I have noticed in driving county roads is that whether houses are in subdivisions or not, they all face the street. They don't face south. They don't take advantage of their own topography and exposure. We need to give up front garden grass patches and place houses, whether they're a whole bunch of houses or just an individual house, in the best location to be passive, at the least. And build gardens and HOA common areas that fill in the spaces around them and provide canopy trees on the west and on the west sides and things like that. Why are we not doing that? And should we put it in the code?
Well, first of all, don't apologize for taking out a small piece of woods to build a house, because everyone in this room who has a house, their builder took out a small piece of woods. Even if you're the third owner, they still had a builder. We face our dwellings in North America towards the street. That's probably a holdover of European tradition. I don't have a good answer for why we don't spin them to get their optimum south facing. I don't have, sometimes it's the lots they're laid out on, they don't allow it. But that's not a good and complete answer. I don't have a good answer. Sorry. Oh, I've done it. When I have room to rotate and a customer who's willing, we do.
I just wanted to note that the property size clean energy loan program is going through some updates at the legislative level at the county right now to include more property owners. It already includes certain kinds of users, businesses that include agriculture, that include small businesses, industries. You can't use it on residential property because it's federally prohibited, so there's not much we can do about that. But we would love to work with you to promote more of our programs. I just hired a communications manager this past year to try to get the word out more about the good work that we're doing, and so I appreciate you saying what you have, and we're anxious and excited to move forward in that direction, so thanks.
I want to be, the FCBIA wants to be a walking commercial for those programs.
Go ahead.
Hey, yeah. So I'm just wondering, in an increasingly hot, wet, and windy Frederick, if there's any sort of like practical tips that you might have for homeowners to mitigate or prevent any damage to homes.
Hot is windy and wet. Those are three different things. Well, for hot, insulation. There are injection technologies, that makes it sound fancy. We drill small 2-inch holes in every stud bay and pump foam into the walls. That starts paying for itself immediately. That addresses hot, and it saves your cold in the heat. Wet, Keeping your gutters clean and maintaining positive drainage, negative or positive fall away from the house is absolutely critically important. It's also the best way to keep basements dry is manage water on the surface. Once you go into below ground and mechanical systems, you've already like failed your first line of defense kind of thing. It was hot. Windy, thank you. That depends on your builder. You know, if you have certainteed vinyl siding, which is on 90% of what has been built in the last, well, since it replaced aluminum siding in the 70s, you're good for 80-mile-an-hour gusts, maybe, but it depends on how often it was nailed and fastened. You'd have to redress or reside your house if you want it to be truly, 110-mile-an-hour gust proof, and replace it with a rigid product like a hardy fiber cement or something. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the panel again and thank all of you for being here.